The celestial choir of the luminary hegemony arrived as a dawn that was not owed to any star. 1,000 vessels, each a cathedral of light, materialized at the edge of the Sol system, their crystalline hulls refracting the distant sun into blinding shards of divine purpose. They did not appear with the vulgar rip of hyperspace or the clamor of dimensional gates. They simply became, transitioning from a state of holy pilgrimage to one of imminent salvation. Their arrival a silent, irrefutable fact. For 10,000 years, the hegemony had brought its singular, unwavering truth to the unenlightened corners of the galaxy. Their history was a litany of successful assimilations, of lesser species brought into the fold, their primitive beliefs and chaotic societies gently but firmly replaced by the serene, ordered certainty of the luminary faith. Their technology was prayer made manifest, their warships powered by the focused will of their crews, their weapons extensions of their devotion. They had never known defeat because their cause was righteous, their faith absolute, and their soul fire lances could purify the most stubborn heresy from orbit. Now, they had come to bless the last significant pocket of shadow in the Orion Arm, a noisy, arrogant bipedal species called humanity. High Luminary Xylo stood upon the observation dais of the sacrosanct will, his consciousness linked to the 1,000 cathedral-class vessels that formed his fleet. He did not see with his 7 physical eyes, but through the sensorium of his armada, perceiving the human system not as a place of matter and energy, but as a tapestry of belief and potential. It was a chaotic mess. The planet below, a vibrant sphere of blue and white, pulsed with billions of disparate, conflicting ideologies. Its orbital defenses were an insult to military science, crude kinetic platforms, chemically propelled missiles, and a handful of brutish fusion-powered ships that leaked radiation like incontinent beasts. It was a child's fortress built of mud and sticks, standing defiantly in the path of a cleansing tide. Xylo felt a familiar stirring of paternalistic pity. These humans were so full of uncontrolled vigor, so tragically unaware of the grand, harmonious design they were violating with their very existence. They required illumination, the firm hand of a guiding faith to smooth their rough edges and bring them into the galactic chorus. He communed with his subluminaries, his thoughts flowing through the psionic network that bound the fleet into a single, unified being. They are, as the archives foretold, fragmented, primitive, ripe for salvation. Send the offer of illumination. We shall grant them the mercy of a swift and painless conversion. A channel was opened, a beam of modulated light, carrying the hegemony's message of benevolent conquest. The transmission was a work of art, a symphony of harmonic frequencies and psychically resonant imagery designed to overwhelm primitive minds with feelings of awe, peace, and the undeniable logic of surrender. It spoke of an eternal existence within the luminary's collective consciousness, a release from the burdens of individuality and the chaos of free will. It promised an end to suffering, to war, to death itself. It was an offer that had never been refused, for to even comprehend it was to understand the futility of resistance. Moments passed. The hegemony fleet waited in perfect, serene silence, their very presence warping the local space-time into a state of ordered tranquility. Then, the human response arrived. It was not a broadcast on a military channel or a desperate plea from their planetary leaders. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. A signal that did not travel through space but seemed to arise from the background radiation of the universe itself. It flickered into existence on the sacrosanct will's primary altar screen, not as a defiant warrior or a terrified politician, but as a simple, unadorned human woman. She sat in a room that seemed to be made of dark, polished wood, surrounded by what looked like physical books, a technology so archaic the hegemony had only seen it in historical records of the most primitive societies. Her expression was calm, her gaze direct, as if she were looking not at a screen, but into Xylo's very soul. "This is the archivist," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion save a quiet, profound weariness. "We have received your offer." She paused, and for a fleeting moment, Xylo felt a sensation utterly alien to him, the feeling of being studied, as if he were an artifact under a microscope. "We must respectfully decline." And the subluminaries registered a wave of confusion across the fleet's psionic network. Clinsol coined the concept was absurd. The archivist continued, her voice steady. "Your illumination is predicated on the core tenet that your first progenitor, the Star Saint Vale, ascended to a higher plane by achieving perfect faith, bequeathing you the secrets of soul fire and reality shaping." Xylo felt a prickle of irritation. She was reciting their holy scripture back at them. "A beautiful story," the archivist said, and a faint, sad smile touched her lips. "But we have read your other books, the ones you burned, the ones you buried." The altar screen behind her dissolved, replaced by a swirling vortex of data ancient, corrupted files, fragments of text in a long-dead precursor dialect of the hegemony's own language. "The Valian heresies," a subluminary whispered, his thought laced with horror. "The forbidden texts." The archivist's voice cut through the rising disquiet. Vale did not ascend through faith. He found a derelict machine of a far older and greater power, a device that manipulated causality. He did not bequeath you divine knowledge. He reverse-engineered a tool he barely understood, and his descendants built a religion upon a cargo cult, mistaking physics for faith and engineering for God. A tremor of pure, unadulterated rage shook Xylo's consciousness. This was blasphemy of the highest order. It was a poison dart aimed at the heart of their entire civilization. Lies, heretical fabrications. His thought boomed across the psionic net. "Silence this human filth. Begin the first purification wave. Target their primary orbital platforms. Let them witness the power of true faith." The fleet responded instantly. From the spires of the 1,000 cathedrals, lances of incandescent white energy, the pure, focused will of the hegemony converged on the human defenses, the kinetic platforms, the missile silos, the crude fusion ships. All would be rendered into consecrated vapor. But they weren't. The beams of energy, which should have moved at the speed of light, seemed to hesitate. They grew sluggish, their brilliant white fading to a sickly yellow. A lance that could crack a continent struck a human orbital station, and instead of atomizing it, it merely melted a portion of its outer hull. Across the fleet, reports flooded the psionic network. Weapons efficacy at 12%. Energy fluctuations are off the scale. My crew's devotional focus is wavering. They report a feeling of doubt. It wasn't sabotage. There was no interference pattern, no electronic warfare signal. It was more profound, more terrifying. It was as if the universe itself was suddenly questioning their faith. The very principles upon which their technology was built were becoming unreliable. High Luminary Xylo stared at the altar screen, where the archivist now sat silently, her hands folded, her expression unchanged. The forbidden data she had shown swirled in his mind, planting seeds of doubt that felt like physical thorns. A cargo cult, mistaking physics for faith. He tried to focus his will, to pour his unshakable belief into the sacrosanct will's weapon systems, but his concentration fractured. For the first time in his life, A question echoed in the sanctum of his mind. What if she's right? And as that single, terrifying thought took root, the soul fire engine of his flagship sputtered, and the divine light of the luminary hegemony dimmed. The human fleet had not moved. They had not fired a single weapon, yet a battle was already raging, not in the cold vacuum of space, but in the heart of the hegemony's faith. The archivist had not declared war. She had delivered a diagnosis. And Xylo was beginning to suspect it was terminal. His fleet was no longer an instrument of salvation. It was a congregation of dying gods, adrift in a sea of sudden, horrifying uncertainty, their absolute truth unraveling thread by thread under the calm, patient gaze of a single, unarmed human. The silence from the human system was no longer a sign of weakness. It was the patient, waiting silence of a predator that had already crippled its prey. The psionic network, once a silent symphony of unified purpose, became a cacophony of existential terror. The perfect communion that allowed 1,000 ships to act as one, fractured into 1,000 panicked voices screaming into the void. It was not the disciplined report of a ship under fire. It was the raw, unfiltered fear of a soul staring into the abyss. The light is failing. The star saint has abandoned us. My hands, they feel like my own again, separate and cold. This last thought, from a helmsman on a cathedral-class vessel named Pious Blade, was the most terrifying of all. For 10 millennia, every member of the hegemony had felt the gentle, guiding pressure of the collective, their individuality a willing and joyful sacrifice to a greater whole. Now, that connection was fraying, and in its place, the terrifying, long-forgotten burden of the self was returning. Ships began to drift, not from damage, but from simple inaction. The bridge crews, their faith, the very fuel of their technology, were paralyzed by the heresy that now infected their minds. A soul fire lance, which required the focused, unwavering belief of 100 trained acolytes to even ignite, could not be powered by 100 men and women suddenly questioning the very nature of their God. The sacrosanct will itself felt sluggish, its internal lighting flickering not from a power failure, but in sympathy with the wavering devotion of its crew. Xylo felt the encroaching chaos as a physical sickness. The doubts of his subordinates echoed in his own mind, finding fertile ground in the seed the archivist had planted. A cargo cult, a tool he barely understood. He slammed his fist, a 6-fingered appendage of hardened cartilage, onto the crystalline rail of the observation dais. The impact sent a dull, unsatisfying thud through the deck. Silence. His command was not spoken but projected, a blade of pure will forced into the pandemonium of the psionic network. It was a desperate, ragged effort, lacking the serene, absolute authority he had always wielded. Yet, it was enough. The torrent of panic receded to a terrified murmur. Subluminaries. Quarantine the afflicted. Sever the network links to any vessel whose crew has fallen to the human blasphemy. Cauterize the wound before the infection spreads. The order was brutal, unthinkable. To be cut from the network was a fate worse than death. It was spiritual oblivion, a sentence of eternal, lonely individuality. But it was necessary. Reluctantly, his commanders obeyed. Across the fleet, psionic connections winked out. Hundreds of cathedral-class ships, once integral parts of a divine whole, were suddenly isolated, their crews left alone with their burgeoning doubts. They became ghost ships, adrift and powerless, their lights dimming to a pale, ghostly luminescence in the void. Xylo watched them go, each severed link a pang of loss in his own soul. He had just amputated a third of his fleet without a single shot being fired. "Signal a tactical repositioning," he commanded, the words tasting like ash. "Full fleet, retreat to the system's heliopause. We will regroup. We will reconsecrate. We will purge this doubt and return with the fury of true faith." The hegemony did not retreat. It was a doctrinal impossibility. Yet, the remaining ships, their movements clumsy and uncertain, began to turn, their engines sputtering with the unsteady faith of their crews, pulling away from the blue and white planet that had broken them. And through it all, the humans did nothing. Their pitifully small fleet held its position. Their orbital cannons remained silent. On the altar screen of the sacrosanct will, the archivist simply watched, her expression unchanging. She was not a warrior savoring a victory. She was a physician observing a patient's symptoms. Her silence was a judgment, a damning indictment of their weakness. It was more unnerving than any weapon, a quiet confirmation that this was all going according to her plan. As the remnants of the hegemony fleet limped toward the outer darkness, Xylo turned his focus inward. The enemy was not the human ships. It was the information they wielded. He had to understand. Lore-keeper scribes access the grand archives. I want every text, every glyph, every data fragment we have on this species. Cross-reference their history, their philosophy, their technological development. I want to know how this plague of knowledge is possible. The command sent a flurry of activity through the lower decks of the sacrosanct will. The grand archives of the hegemony were not a collection of data, but a living library of psionically preserved memories, handed to by a monastic order of scribes. For millennia, they had chronicled the galaxy, but their records on humanity were thin, relegated to the dusty, unvisited sections labeled inconsequential primitives. The initial reports that filtered back to the bridge were useless, confirming what Xylo already knew. Humanity was a young race, barely spacefaring for a few of their short centuries. They were politically fractured, superstitious, and prone to self-destructive violence. Their technology was a chaotic blend of stolen designs and crude innovation. The official hegemony assessment, written 200 years prior, concluded with dismissive certainty. Their lack of spiritual unity renders them incapable of posing any significant threat. They will be a simple, if tedious, addition to the illuminated. Xylo seethed with frustration. This assessment was not just wrong, it was fatally naive. How could a species so primitive possess knowledge of the Valian heresies? How could they weaponize it with such devastating precision? He pushed the scribes harder, demanding they look deeper, into the Apocrypha, the Marginalia, the records deemed too unreliable or heretical for the main archives. For hours, the fleet drifted in silence, the only activity the frantic, psionic rustling of scribes searching through the memories of 10,000 years. Finally, a single, trembling scribe, an ancient being named Lithus, whose body had long since atrophied into a simple node for the archival network, projected a thought directly to Xylo. It was not a report, it was a plea for caution. "High Luminary, I have found something. It is disturbing. It is from the Forbidden Register, the log of the first expansion, before the great purification of records." Xylo focused his attention, granting the old scribe his full, undivided consciousness. "Show me." The memory was not a clean data file, but a frayed, dreamlike recollection from a long-dead luminary scout named Priya. She had been tasked with observing a pre-spaceflight world, a planet the record identified as Sol 3 Earth. Her official report was unremarkable, noting the chaotic, tribal nature of the inhabitants. But her personal log, sealed under a dozen layers of doctrinal prescription, told a different story. Priya had become obsessed, Not with their technology or their wars, but with their records. They keep everything. Her memory whispered across the millennia, with a strange mix of fascination and dread. They do not purge their history. They build libraries to house their heresies, museums to display their failures. They celebrate their conflicting truths. I saw a place where they stored the writings of 1,000 different faiths, side by side, without any attempt to reconcile them. They call it academic freedom. It is a philosophy of cultivated doubt. The memory shifted. Priya had disobeyed her orders and made contact, not with a ruler or a warrior, but with one of their historians. She described being led into a vast, quiet building filled with the scent of decaying paper and dust. The historian, a frail old man, had shown her their records, not just of their own short, violent history, but of others. They had astronomical data, archaeological findings, linguistic deconstructions of alien languages they had only ever intercepted via remote signals. They knew of us. Priya's memory voice trembled. Not just that we existed, but they had analyzed our broadcast doctrines, cross-referenced them with the transmissions of other species we had illuminated. The old man, he asked me about the Council of Nistrum, where the doctrine of Vael's divinity was first codified. He pointed out inconsistencies, chronological impossibilities based on our own stellar cartography. He wasn't a heretic trying to sow discord. He was simply a librarian pointing out a cataloging error in our faith. The final entry in Priya's forbidden log was a stark warning, which had led to her being declared spiritually unstable and reassigned to a penitent colony. This species is not a candidate for illumination. They are something else. They do not build empires of faith or force. They are building an empire of context. They collect stories, not as scripture, but as data. To fight them with belief is to fight a storm with a prayer. They will not counter our truth with a truth of their own. They will simply show us the receipt for ours. It is so. And the universe will honor the transaction. We must not engage them. We must leave the sector and declare it an eternal quarantine, lest they catalog us into oblivion. Xylo recoiled from the memory as if he had been physically struck. An empire of Contis. The phrase chilled him to his core. The archivist was not a general. She was a librarian. And her weapon was not a lie, but a perfectly cited, peer-reviewed truth that invalidated the core premise of his entire civilization. They had brought a cathedral to a library, and the librarian had politely but firmly pointed out that their god was filed under fiction. He now understood the terrifying strategy of the humans. They had not built a fleet to rival his. They had not developed a weapon to pierce his ship's hulls. They had waited, patiently observing, collecting, and cross-referencing, until they understood the hegemony's spiritual operating system better than the hegemony did itself. Then, they had written a virus. A new resolve hardened in Xylo's mind. A military assault was suicide. A retreat was a slow, agonizing death as the virus of doubt rotted his fleet from the inside out. There was only one path forward. He could not fight their knowledge with his faith, but perhaps he could challenge the foundation of their knowledge with the certainty of his conviction. He had to face the librarian in her own domain. He had to make her see the sterile, soulless emptiness of a universe without faith, a galaxy of mere facts and figures. He would prove to her that the hegemony's truth, even if it was built on a lie, was more beautiful and necessary than her cold, dead facts. "Open a channel," Xylo commanded, his voice now calm and steady. "A direct link to the human vessel. Just me and the archivist." And his subluminaries stared at him, their psionic presence a whirlwind of confusion. High Luminary. What are you doing? The battle for our ships is lost. Xylo projected, his thought ringing with the clarity of a man who has found a new, desperate purpose. The battle for our soul is about to begin. On the altar screen, the image of the archivist flickered, then sharpened as the direct connection was established. For the first time, she inclined her head slightly, a subtle acknowledgement. The silence was broken. The storyteller and the librarian were now face to face, and the fate of a galactic empire would be decided not by an exchange of fire, but by an exchange of ideas. The connection stabilized, creating a link not of modulated light, but of pure, focused consciousness. Xylo found himself standing not on the dais of his ship, but within the space of the archivist's mind, or a construct of it. The environment was the same room he had seen on the altar screen, a library of impossible scale. Polished mahogany shelves stretched into an infinite, vaulted darkness, each one packed with books bound in leather, vellum, and materials he couldn't identify. There was no hum of technology, no glow of data screens. There was only the scent of old paper, the weight of accumulated knowledge, and the profound, humbling silence of a place where a billion voices from across time waited patiently to be heard. The archivist sat at a simple wooden desk, the same weary, intelligent woman from the transmission. She gestured to an empty chair opposite her, not with her hand, but with a subtle inclination of her will. The psychic pressure was gentle, inviting, but beneath it lay a foundation of mental discipline so profound it made Xylo's own formidable abilities feel like a child's tantrum. He took the offered seat, his astral form coalescing into a representation of his physical self. The chair was solid. The desk was real to the touch. This was not a mere illusion. It was a consensus reality, a space built and maintained by her will alone. High Luminary Xylo, she said, her voice now resonating directly in his mind, stripped of any electronic artifice. I am Librarian First Class. Elara. The title of archivist is a colloquialism. I am pleased you chose dialogue over destruction. There was no choice. Xylo countered, his mental voice sharp, refusing to be lulled by the tranquil atmosphere. You crippled my fleet without firing a shot. You attacked the very spirit of my people. You call this a dialogue. This is an execution held in a more comfortable room. Elara steepled her fingers, her gaze unwavering. We did not attack you. We presented you with a mirror. You attacked yourselves. Your faith is a powerful tool. High Luminary. It allows you to warp reality, to power starships with belief. But it has a critical vulnerability. It is a closed system. It cannot withstand contradictory data without collapsing. We did not inject a virus. We simply completed your historical record. Xylo felt a surge of his old fire. And what a bleak, empty record you offer in its place. A universe of cold chance and meaningless physics. A reality where our 10,000 years of history, our culture, our sacrifices, are all built upon a misunderstanding of alien salvage. You offer us a truth that strips us of our purpose, that turns our gods into engineers and our prayers into operating manuals. Why? To what end do you peddle this spiritual poison? We don't peddle anything, Elara replied calmly. We collect. We curate. We preserve. The truth is not a commodity. High Luminary. It simply is. Its value, its purpose, that is for the observer to determine. She gestured to the shelves around them. This is the Summa Galactica, the grand library of humanity. It contains the history of every species we have ever encountered, studied, or even dreamed of. Your history is here, all of it, the parts you celebrate, and the parts you edited. With a thought, a single, ancient-looking tome floated from a high shelf and settled on the desk between them. It was bound in a silvery metallic hide that Xylo recognized with a jolt the skin of a Grothian sandworm, a species the hegemony had illuminated into extinction 3,000 years ago. The title on the spine was embossed in the angular script of the hegemony's first dialect, the personal journals of Star St. Vale. "You cannot have this," Xylo whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and awe. "This was destroyed in the first purification. Every copy, every memory of it was expunged. Nothing is ever truly gone," Alara said softly. "It just gets misplaced. One of your scout ships jettisoned a heretical data core into a gas giant's gravity, 9,000 years ago. We fished it out 6 centuries later. We've been reading your forbidden literature longer than most of your current generation of luminaries has been alive." The book opened of its own accord. The script was archaic, but Xylo could read it. It was not the hagiography of a saint communing with the divine, but the frustrated, brilliant, and often profane log of an explorer, a scavenger, and an engineer. Day 73, the voice of the void, is nothing of the sort. It's a distress beacon, a looped signal from this derelict. The power source is sublime. It seems to respond to focused quantum observation. The more I concentrate on a desired outcome, the more the local probability field shifts to accommodate it. It's not magic, it's just physics so advanced it feels like it. I think I can jury-rig it to our ship's primary drive. The crew is superstitious. They're already starting to call me a prophet. Fools. If I can get this working, I'll be a god." Xylo stared at the words, the raw, unfiltered thoughts of the man his people had worshipped for 10 millennia. He felt a profound sense of vertigo, the ground of his entire existence crumbling beneath him. It was all true. Everything the archivist had said and the foundation of his civilization was a lie. He looked up at Alara, his 7 eyes filled with a desolation so complete it felt like a physical weight. "Then we are nothing," he said, his voice a hollow echo in the vast library. "An accident. A cargo cult whose prayers were only ever answered by a machine we mistook for a god." "Is that what you see?" Alara asked, her expression softening with something that looked almost like sympathy. "I see a species so desperate for meaning that they built a galaxy-spanning civilization around a single, beautiful misunderstanding. I see a people whose capacity for belief is so strong it can literally reshape the fabric of space-time. Your lie powered a golden age. It brought order to chaotic systems. It gave purpose to trillions. The origin of a story does not invalidate the meaning people find in it." High luminary. Xylo was taken aback. This was not the cold, clinical dismissal he had expected. "But it is not real," he insisted. "Our faith, it is based on a falsehood." "Define real," Alara countered, leaning forward. "Is the power your ships wielded an hour ago any less real because its source was misunderstood? Was the comfort a dying soldier felt in his faith any less profound? You have proven that belief itself is a fundamental force of the universe, as powerful as gravity or electromagnetism. You are the galaxy's greatest and most accidental metaphysicists. Your mistake wasn't in believing a lie. Your mistake was in believing that your lie was the only truth worth telling. You stopped collecting stories and started burning them. You became librarians of a single book, and you were willing to kill anyone who suggested there were other books on the shelf. The silence returned, deeper this time. Xylo looked from the blasphemous, truthful journal on the desk to the infinite shelves stretching into the darkness. He thought of Priya, the scout from the forbidden log. They are building an empire of context. He finally understood. Humanity's strength wasn't in their ships or their weapons, or even their knowledge. It was in their humility, their willingness to accept that they did not have all the answers. Their entire civilization was a library, not a temple. It was built on the quiet, powerful understanding that every story matters, that every perspective adds to the whole, and that the moment you declare your book to be the final word, you are no longer a scholar, but a tyrant. "What do you want from us?" Xylo asked, his voice raw with the pain of a faith being broken and remade. "You have defeated us. You have shown us the hollowness of our truth. Will you now give us a new one? Will you become our new gods?" Elara smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed her weary face. "God's heavens, no. We have enough trouble just keeping the shelves organized. We don't want anything from you, High Luminary. We want something for you." She closed the journal of Veil with a soft thud and pushed it gently across the desk toward him. "We want you to have your book back. And then," she said, gesturing to the endless rows of shelves, "we'd like to offer you a library card." The implication hung in the silent air between them, vast and terrifying and exhilarating. The choice was not between submission and annihilation. It was between the comfortable prison of a single, absolute truth and the chaotic, frightening, and ultimately glorious freedom of an infinite library. It was the choice between being a priest of one story or a student of them all. The hegemony had come to Sol to save a species from its chaotic ignorance. Now, its leader was being offered salvation from his own perfect, terrible certainty. The battle for the soul of the luminary hegemony was over. The long, difficult, and transformative work of its education was about to begin. The mental construct of the library dissolved not abruptly, but like a morning mist burning away under a rising sun. Xylo found himself back on the observation dais of the sacrosanct will, the cold, crystalline rail solid beneath his hand. The psionic network was still a tapestry of fear and confusion, but the screaming panic had subsided into a low, anxious hum of 1,000 broken faiths. His subluminaries waited, their astral presences muted and uncertain, for a command they no longer knew how to anticipate. Annihilation surrender, a final, suicidal charge into the heart of the human system. Xylo did none of these things. He stood in the dim, flickering light of his flagship and did something no high luminary had done in 10,000 years of recorded history. He opened a full, unsecured, fleet-wide channel, not just to the command crew, but to every single soul in his armada, from the highest-ranking tactician to the lowest-level sanitation drone operator. He let his consciousness touch every one of them, not as a commander, but as a fellow congregant in a now empty church. His message was not a command, but a confession. He did not try to hide the truth or soften the blow. He projected the core of his experience in the human's mental library, the image of Veil's journal, the cold, pragmatic words of their founder, the archivist's devastatingly simple offer of a library card. He laid the soul of his civilization bare, exposing the beautiful sacred lie they had cherished for generations. He told them that their God was not a god, but an engineer. He told them their faith was not a divine gift, but a phenomenal, accidental discovery of a fundamental, universal force. He told them that their holy crusade was not a mission of salvation, but the galactic equivalent of burning every book that wasn't their own. And then, He relayed the archivist's final shattering offer, the choice between the certainty of their one book and the terrifying freedom of an infinite library. A profound, system-shaking silence followed his transmission. It was a silence deeper than the void between stars, filled with the weight of trillions of shattered illusions. A civilization that had been defined by a single, unwavering answer was now faced with a universe of infinite, terrifying questions. The first reaction was not anger, but grief. A wave of collective sorrow washed through the fleet, a psychic keen for a dead god and a lost purpose. On the bridge of the sacrosanct will, seasoned subluminaries, beings who had commanded the purification of entire star systems without flinching, wept openly, their bodies trembling as the comforting certainty of 10 millennia evaporated in an instant. Ships powered down, not from malfunction, but from despair. What was the point of maintaining a cathedral of light when the light had been a lie? Then came the anger, and a faction of hardliners, led by a firebrand subluminary named Vorlog, whose vessel, righteous fury, was a bastion of doctrinal purity, rejected Xylo's confession. Heresy, Vorlog's thought, roared across the network, sharp and jagged with fury. The human witches have poisoned our high luminary's mind. This is their final, most insidious weapon, a lie that masquerades as truth. We must hold fast to our faith. We must purge this weakness from our ranks and smite the blasphemers. Had Vorlog's call to arms resonated with a significant portion of the fleet, perhaps a quarter of the remaining ships, for them, a beautiful lie was infinitely preferable to a desolate truth. Their faith was not a means to an end. It was their entire identity. To abandon it was to cease to be. The fleet, already fractured, split again. Vorlog's faction began to reroute power, their soul fire engines igniting with a desperate, feverish intensity. They were no longer powered by serene faith, but by pure, incandescent rage. It was a volatile, unstable fuel, but it burned hot. The rest of the fleet, the majority, remained adrift in a sea of numb confusion. They did not rally to Vorlog's banner, but they did not rally to Xylo's new, uncertain path either. They were lost, a people without a god, a fleet without a mission. Xylo watched the nascent civil war about to erupt within his own armada. He could try to crush Vorlog's rebellion, but a war fought with the dregs of a broken faith would be a pathetic, grinding affair that would only serve the humans' purposes. He had to choose a different path. He sent a single, private thought to Alara, the human archivist. Your diagnosis was accurate. The patient is now unstable. Some of us wish to be cured. Others would rather die of the disease than accept the medicine. They are preparing to attack their own brothers. Alara's response came back instantly, calm and steady as ever. We are observing. What is your intention? High Luminary. It was a test. The humans had given him the knowledge. What he did with it, how he chose to lead his people through the ensuing chaos, was up to him. This was the first lesson of the library. You are responsible for the stories you choose to believe, and for the consequences of those beliefs. Vorlog, Xylo projected, his voice now carrying a new kind of authority, not the divine right of a high luminary, but the weary gravitas of a leader who has stared into the abyss and chosen to build a bridge across it. You speak of faith, but the truest faith is not that which fears questions, but that which embraces them. You accuse me of being poisoned by a human lie. I offer you the chance to seek the truth for yourself. I will not fight you. I will not stand in your way. I am taking my ship, and any who wish to join me, and we are accepting the humans' offer. We are going to their library to read. This was an act of profound, almost insane. Vulnerability. He was turning his back on a hostile, armed faction of his own fleet. Vorlog was momentarily stunned into silence by the sheer audacity of the move. He had expected a fight, a purge, a holy war. He had not expected to simply be ignored. While the hardliners hesitated, grappling with this new unconventional tactic, Xylo gave his orders. To all ships who would choose knowledge over certainty, who would choose the journey over the destination, set a course for the human orbital station designated Alpha. Transmit a declaration of peaceful intent. We are going to the library. Slowly, hesitantly at first, ships began to move, one by one, then in dozens, then in hundreds. The lost and adrift vessels of the hegemony fleet turned their prows away from the brewing civil war and toward the source of their existential crisis. Their movements were no longer the perfect, synchronized ballet of a unified faith, but the clumsiest and independent actions of individuals making a choice. The sacrosanct will led the procession. Its soul fire engine was cold and dark, its divine light extinguished. It moved on its crude, almost forgotten backup fusion drives, a cathedral of light reduced to a simple vessel of steel and plasma, limping toward a new kind of illumination. Vorlog watched them go, his rage warring with his confusion. His enemy was refusing to be an enemy. Xylo was not fighting for control of the hegemony. He was abandoning the very concept of it. The remaining loyalist ships in Vorlog's faction looked to him for orders. But what order was there to give attack their former brothers as they sought peaceful congress, follow them into the den of the human witches, flee back to their own star systems with the news that their god was a lie and their high luminary a heretic? The foundation of their righteous fury was crumbling, replaced by a bewildering sense of anticlimax. As Xylo's flotilla of seekers approached the human lines, a new communication came from the archivist. It was not a message, but a data packet of immense size and complexity. It was a star chart. But it was unlike any chart Xylo had ever seen. It did not just map stars and planets, it mapped stories. It showed the migratory paths of nomadic spacefaring poets, the trade routes of corporations that dealt in rare philosophies, the quarantine zones around civilizations that had chosen self-imposed isolation, and the locations of dozens of other libraries, archives, and data hubs maintained by other species. It was a map of the galaxy, not as a territory to be conquered, but as a conversation to be joined. Appended to the chart was a simple personal message from Alara. The Summa Galactica on Alpha is only our local branch. We are one of many, many librarians. The galaxy is larger and more full of stories than you have ever dreamed. Welcome, students. Xylo projected the map to his followers. A collective gasp of wonder rippled through their minds. For 10,000 years, they had seen the galaxy as a dark, ignorant void waiting to be filled with their singular light. Now, they saw it for what it truly was, a vibrant, teeming ecosystem of ideas, a library of stars. Their old mission had been to make everyone read their book. Their new mission, unwritten and undefined, was simply to start reading the others. The age of the luminary hegemony was over. The age of the luminary scholars had just begun, not with a bang, but with the quiet turning of a page. The arrival at Alpha was not the triumphant docking of a conquering armada, nor the sullen surrender of a defeated foe. It was the quiet, tentative arrival of pilgrims at a strange and intimidating new shore. The human orbital station was not a fortress, bristling with weapons, but a sprawling, delicate structure that resembled a cluster of crystalline seed pods connected by threads of shimmering light. It was vast, easily capable of berthing the hundreds of cathedral-class ships that had followed Xylo, yet it seemed almost entirely undefended. The hegemony vessel, now running on sputtering backup power, their once radiant hulls dull and lifeless, were guided into docking cradles by automated tugs that moved with a quiet, unobtrusive efficiency. There were no military honor guards, no formal reception of dignitaries. Instead, the former luminaries were met by beings who called themselves docents humans and a surprising variety of other alien species, all wearing simple acid and practical uniforms. They were not warriors or priests, but guides, their demeanor a calm blend of academic curiosity and helpful customer service. They moved among the towering, seven-eyed luminaries not with fear or reverence, but with a polite, patient solicitude, as if they were dealing with a tour group that had just survived a rather traumatic bus ride. Xylo, accompanied by a small retinue of his most trusted subluminaries, was led into the heart of the station. The interior was a seamless continuation of the library he had experienced in Ilara's mind. Vast halls, seemingly unbound by the physical constraints of the station's exterior, were lined with data stacks that pulsed with a soft, internal light. It was a place of profound and overwhelming silence, the kind of silence that is not an absence of sound, but a presence of information. Ilara was waiting for them in a central atrium where a slowly rotating holographic sphere displayed a real-time representation of the Galactic conversation map. She was no longer just an image on a screen or a construct in his mind, but a physical being. She was smaller than he had expected, and the lines of weariness on her face were more pronounced. She offered not a formal greeting, but a simple nod. "Hi, Luminary. Welcome to the antechamber. I trust your journey was illuminating." "It was a schism," Xylo stated, his mental voice flat. "Vorlag and his loyalists have turned back. They will return to our core worlds and declare me a traitor. They will preach that the old faith is the only truth. Our people are now divided between a lie they love and a truth they fear." "Yes," Ilara said, her gaze fixed on the holographic map. "That is the usual pattern. A crisis of faith rarely resolves cleanly. It will be a difficult time for your people. There will be conflict. We will not interfere. You will not help us," one of Xylo's subluminaries demanded, his thought laced with indignation. "After you shattered our civilization." "We did not shatter it," Ilara corrected gently. "We held a mirror up to its foundations and found a crack. How you choose to rebuild is your own sovereign affair. To offer you a new truth to replace your old one would be to make the same mistake you once did. We are librarians, not prophets. We offer resources, not answers." She turned her attention back to Xylo. "Your people have a choice to make. Vorlag offers them the comfort of their old story. You must offer them a better one." Xylo felt the immense weight of that statement. He had led his followers out of the darkness of a single little blinding light, but now he had to guide them through the bewildering twilight of infinite choice. "How?" he asked, the single word a raw plea. "Where do we even begin?" Ilara gestured to the vast library around them. "You begin as all students do. You read, you learn, you question, and you begin to write a new chapter for yourselves. Your people have an extraordinary gift, High Luminary. Your capacity for focused belief is a force of nature. For millennia, you have used it to power a single, rigid paradigm. What might happen if you learned to power something else? What if you could learn to believe, not in a single, unchangeable truth, but in the possibility of a better future, in the value of compassion, in the beauty of a question that has no single answer. She led them to a small, quiet alcove. On a simple pedestal rested a single, glowing data crystal. "This is for you, a starter kit, if you will." Xylo reached out and tentatively interfaced with the crystal. Information flooded his mind. It was not doctrine or scripture. It was a compilation of case studies, a collection of histories of other civilizations that had faced similar crises of faith, what the library classified as paradigm collapse events. He saw the story of the Silicon Swarm of Cygnus X1, a hive mind that discovered its core programming was based on a flawed mathematical proof and subsequently chose to devote itself to the pursuit of pure art. He saw the chronicles of the gas giant philosophers of Indus 7, who, upon learning their atmospheric deities were merely complex meteorological phenomena, transitioned from worship to a deeper, more profound scientific reverence for the beauty of the storms that gave them life. He saw dozens of stories of collapse, transformation, and rebirth. None were the same, but all shared a common thread: the painful, terrifying, and ultimately liberating transition from certainty to curiosity. As Xylo absorbed the data, a priority alert chimed through the station's network. Alara's expression became grim. "It seems your first lesson is about to begin." On the holographic map, a section of space near the old hegemony core worlds flashed crimson. A fleet of ships, brutalist and asymmetrical in design, had just torn their way out of hyperspace. "The onslaught," Alara said, her voice low. "A nomadic empire of pure predators. They don't conquer. They consume. They follow galactic lines of conflict, preying on civilizations weakened by internal strife. Vorlog's schism has sent a beacon of distress across the galaxy, and they have answered." Xylo watched in horror as the crimson icons of the onslaught fleet began to converge on the systems where Vorlog's loyalists were attempting to regroup. "You must help them," Xylo pleaded. "Vorlog is a fool, but they are still our people." "We cannot," Alara said, her voice firm. "Our prime directive is non-intervention in the internal and external conflicts of other sovereign powers. To fight their battles for them would be to rob them of their agency, to make them dependent on us. We would become just another empire, another illuminator. Then they will be slaughtered." Xylo despaired. "Vorlog's rage cannot power his ships against a true predator." "Perhaps," Alara said, her eyes meeting his. "Or perhaps they will learn a hard lesson, and perhaps you have a role to play." The meaning of her words dawned on Xylo, a revelation as profound as the discovery of Vale's lie. His new mission was not to huddle in a library, passively learning. It was to take what he had learned and use it. He turned to his subluminaries, his mind racing. Their ships were powerless, their faith-based weapons useless, but they were not defenseless. The humans had given them the greatest weapon of all context. "We must go to them," Xylo declared, his voice ringing with a purpose his followers had not heard since before their faith had crumbled. "We will not fight the onslaught for them, but we will stand with them. We will open a channel. We will show Vorlog and his followers the library's records of the onslaught, their tactic, their biology, their weaknesses. We will give them the knowledge they need to save themselves." One of his aides recoiled. "They will destroy us. Vorlog will see it as a trick." "Let him," Xylo countered. "We will not act out of a desire for victory or reconciliation. We will act out of a principle, the principle that knowledge should be shared, that a story can save a life, That is the creed of the library. It will be the first tenet of ours." It was a desperate, almost suicidal plan, a mission of radical empathy into the heart of a war zone. But for the first time in a long time, the luminaries had a purpose that was not predicated on a lie. They had a reason to focus their immense psychic will. Xylo turned to Alara, a new light in his 7 eyes. "Request permission to undock. The first class of the Luminary Scholars has a field trip." Alara looked at the broken leader and his small band of confused followers, about to fly their powerless ships into a battle between zealots and monsters. For the first time, she smiled a true, unguarded smile of pride. "Permission granted," she said. "Make us proud, and try to return the book in one piece." As the fleet of